Hello and a very warm welcome to all our listeners joining us today on Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley. We are so grateful to have you with us as we dive into those quiet, often misunderstood changes that happen within our bodies as the years pass. Today, we are joined by a man who has spent over 5 decades navigating the delicate intersections of human health, aging, and science. He is a renowned neurosurgeon and someone who truly understands the heart of the matter. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, it is an absolute honor to have you here to share your wisdom with our community.
Thank you so much, Jane. It is a genuine pleasure to be here with you. When I look back at the thousands of patients I have sat with over the years, I realize that the conversations we have about our health after 60 are some of the most important ones we can ever have. I am deeply moved to be part of this space today, and I hope that by sharing what I have seen in the clinic and what science is finally confirming, we can bring some peace of mind and clarity to everyone listening at home.
You know, Doctor, lately I have been hearing a very consistent and honestly quite heartbreaking frustration from so many of our friends and neighbors who have crossed that 60 or 70-year milestone. They tell me, Jane, I am eating less than I ever have, I am skipping the desserts I used to love, and yet when I step on that scale, the numbers just keep climbing or they refuse to budge. There is this heavy sense of defeat in their voices, a feeling that their own bodies have somehow betrayed them or that they simply lack the willpower they once had. It makes me wonder if we have been looking at this all wrong. Is it really just about the calories on the plate, or is there something much deeper and perhaps more invisible happening inside us that we just do not understand yet?
Jane, you have touched on something that is perhaps the single greatest source of silent frustration for millions of people today. I hear it in my office every single week. A patient will sit across from me looking exhausted and say, "Doctor, I am starving myself, so why am I still getting heavier?" And what I tell them, and what I want everyone listening to understand, is that it is almost never about a lack of willpower. We have been conditioned for decades to believe in the simple math of calories in versus calories out, but as we age, that math changes because the very machinery of our bodies is shifting its rhythm. Recent groundbreaking research coming out of places like Harvard and the University of Tokyo has begun to illuminate a much more complex reality. It is not that you are eating too much, it is that the tiny power plants inside your cells, which we call mitochondria, are beginning to slow down. Think of it like an old, beautiful clock where the gears are just moving a bit more heavily than they used to. After the age of 65, these mitochondria often enter what we might call a sleep mode. They stop efficiently converting your food into energy and instead start sending signals to the body to store everything as fat, almost as a survival mechanism. This is not a failure of character. It is a biological shift in how your cells process life itself. When those cellular engines slow down, you could eat like a bird and still find yourself gaining weight because the body has forgotten how to burn that fuel. It is a profound realization because it shifts the burden of guilt away from the individual. We are finding that the total metabolic rate doesn't just drop because we are old. It drops because the communication between our brain and our cells regarding energy usage has become muffled. It is like trying to have a conversation through a very thick wall. You are speaking, you are trying to tell your body to use the energy from that salad or GU light breakfast, but the cells are not receiving the message. They are waiting for a signal that never comes, so they do the only thing they know how to do, which is to hold on to every single calorie for dear life.
That is such a powerful image, the idea of our cells just waiting for a signal that never arrives, or being in a sleep mode while we are doing our best to stay healthy. It really changes the perspective from one of blame to one of understanding. If it is not about the quantity of food, then what is it that these sleeping mitochondria are actually looking for? I think many of us feel like we are shouting at our bodies to work better, but if the message is muffled, how do we begin to clear that communication? It sounds like we are talking about a fundamental change in how we perceive the aging process itself, moving away from this idea of inevitable decay and towards something we can actually influence if we just knew the right language to speak to ourselves.
Precisely, Jane. We have to stop thinking of our bodies as furnaces that just need less wood as we get older. Instead, we need to think of them as sophisticated instruments that need a very specific kind of tuning. The science is showing us that we cannot simply starve these mitochondria into working harder. In fact, eating too little can often signal even more danger to the body, causing it to grip onto fat stores even more tightly. What we are looking for are the biological triggers that tell the mitochondria to wake up and start burning again. It is about the timing of our light exposure, the rhythm of our movements, and even the temperature of our environment. We are learning that the body after 65 is incredibly sensitive to signals of safety and routine. When we provide the right signals at the right time, we can actually see a resurgence in metabolic activity. I have seen patients who stopped focusing on the scale and started focusing on these internal rhythms, and the transformation is remarkable. They find their energy returning, the fog lifting, and yes, the weight finally beginning to release. It is a journey of rediscovering the natural harmony that our bodies were always meant to have. Even in our later years, we are not just fighting against time, we are learning to dance with it again by understanding the new rules of the stage.
Doctor, as we sit here in this quiet space, I cannot help but think about the heavy emotional toll that these physical changes take on a person's spirit, especially when they feel they are doing everything right but seeing all the wrong results. It is one thing to talk about mitochondria and cellular signals in a lab, but it is quite another to wake up every morning, look in the mirror, and feel like a stranger is looking back at you because your body is changing in ways you cannot control. I often wonder about the stories you hear behind closed doors, the ones where the clinical data meets human tears, and how people at this stage of life manage to carry the weight of feeling like their golden years are being tarnished by a metabolism that has simply given up. Is there a particular moment or a specific person you have encountered who embodies this struggle, someone whose journey might help us understand the profound sense of loss that comes when the body enters this storage mode you mentioned earlier?
You are so right to point out the emotional gravity of this situation, Jane, because for many this is not just about a clothing size, it is about a loss of identity and autonomy. I remember so vividly a woman named Mary Thompson. She is 74 years old and lives in Phoenix, Arizona, in a beautiful sun-drenched neighborhood where you would think health comes naturally. Mary came to me not with a list of medical complaints, but with a heart full of quiet desperation because she felt she was disappearing behind a layer of weight that did not belong to her. She told me she had spent her whole life being active, gardening, and walking. But suddenly, even with a diet that would make a monk look indulgent, she was gaining 10 pounds a year. She sat there in my office, her hands trembling slightly, asking me if this was simply the price of admission for growing old, if she had to just accept that her body was now a vault that only took deposits and never allowed withdrawals. Mary's story is the story of millions who feel that their self-discipline has become a blunt instrument that no longer works. When the body shifts into this storage mode, it creates a psychological prison where every meal is a source of anxiety and every mirror is an enemy. For Mary, the Arizona sun felt colder because she did not have the energy to enjoy it anymore. Her cells were literally hoarding energy instead of letting her use it to play with her grandchildren or walk through her garden. It is a biological betrayal that feels deeply personal, as if the very essence of your vitality is being locked away in a dark room and you have lost the key.
Listening to you describe Mary's experience in Phoenix, I can almost feel that sense of being trapped, that terrifying question of whether we are forced to just surrender to the decay of our own biology. It seems so cruel that at a time when we should be enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of hard work, we instead find ourselves battling a silent internal shutdown. When you looked at Mary, beyond the clinical charts and the age on her file, what did you see in her biological signals that confirmed she wasn't just imagining this? And how do we address that deep-seated fear that this is an inevitable slide toward dependency and illness?
When I looked at Mary's data, Jane, I saw a body that was essentially screaming in silence because its internal clock was completely out of sync with the world around it. Her cortisol levels were peaking at midnight instead of 8 o'clock a.m., and her insulin sensitivity had plummeted not because of sugar, but because her cells had forgotten how to listen to the rhythm of the day. In Phoenix, she was surrounded by light, but her internal biology thought it was living in a cave, so it stayed in a perpetual state of winter, huddling and storing fat for a famine that wasn't coming. I told her that she wasn't failing her body was simply misreading the environment. The fear of dependency is the most potent fear of all for the elderly, and when you feel your metabolism failing, you feel your independence slipping away with it. We had to show Mary that her body wasn't broken, it was just confused, and that that by changing the signals she sent to her cells, she could regain her seat at the table of her own life. It wasn't about eating less for Mary. It was about convincing her mitochondria that it was finally spring again and they were safe to bloom.
It is so counterintuitive, isn't it? The idea that eating less could actually be the very thing that prevents us from getting healthy as we get older. We have been told our entire lives that if you want to lose weight, you just push the plate away. But you are suggesting that for someone in their 70s or 80s, this traditional wisdom might actually be a dangerous trap. I imagine a lot of our listeners are sitting there right now, perhaps feeling a bit hungry because they skipped breakfast or had a tiny salad for lunch, and they are wondering if they have been inadvertently telling their bodies to hold on to every ounce of fat. How does the science, especially these Harvard studies you mentioned regarding cellular oxygen, explain why this starvation approach backfires so drastically in the senior years?
It is a profound irony, Jane, and one that we must address with great care because the stakes are incredibly high for the elderly. The research from Harvard is clear. After the age of 65, our cellular oxygen utilization can drop by as much as 25%. When you combine that natural decline with a severe restriction of calories, you are effectively putting your body into an emergency survival state. Your cells perceive the lack of food not as a diet, but as a threat to their existence. In response, they go into a deep defensive crouch, slowing down every metabolic process to ensure you survive what they think is a period of starvation. This is why many seniors find that when they eat less, they don't get thinner. They just get colder, more tired, and more prone to losing muscle mass while their belly fat remains stubbornly untouched. Eating too little does not wake up the mitochondria. It actually puts them into a deeper coma because there isn't enough thermal energy to keep the metabolic fire burning. You cannot jumpstart a car with an empty battery, and you cannot jumpstart a 68-year-old metabolism by depriving it of the very nutrients it needs to perform cellular repair. We have to shift the conversation from restriction to revitalization.
That image of the defensive crouch is so vivid, and it makes me think about how many people are living in that state of constant internal emergency without even knowing it. If the traditional path of eating less is a dead end, or even a dangerous detour that leads to muscle loss and weakness, it must feel like a very narrow tightrope to walk. How do we explain to someone who has been dieting for 40 years that the rules have changed so fundamentally? Is it a matter of changing what we eat? Or is it about convincing the body that the famine is over so it can finally relax its grip on those fat stores?
It is exactly about ending that internal famine signal, Jane. We have to teach the body that it is safe to burn energy again. When we are young, our metabolism is like a raging bonfire. You can throw almost anything on it and it will burn. But as we age, that fire becomes more like a small flickering candle. If you try to save the candle by not giving it any wax, it will just go out. Instead, you have to carefully shield it and provide the right kind of fuel in the right way to help it grow into a steady flame again. We are finding that for people over 60, the quality and timing of nutrition are far more important than the raw number of calories. If you eat a tiny amount but at the wrong time, your body will still store it. But if you nourish yourself in a way that aligns with your biological clock, your mitochondria begin to sense that the environment is stable and abundant. Only then will they release the lock on those fat cells. We are talking about a total paradigm shift, eating for activation rather than eating for reduction. It is about giving your body the permission to be vibrant again, which is a much more hopeful and sustainable message than the old mantra of self-denial.
As we move through our day, I think many of us have these little rituals that we assume are helping us, but I suspect some of them might be doing exactly the opposite of what we intend. We think we are being virtuous by taking it easy in the morning or perhaps staying indoors to avoid the morning chill, yet these very habits might be the silent saboteurs of our metabolism. I'm curious about the specific patterns you see in your patients, those subtle daily choices that seem harmless but are actually sending the wrong signals to the body's control center. Is there a story of someone who was doing everything they thought was right, only to find that their routine was actually keeping their metabolism in a state of hibernation?
There is a very telling example in a gentleman I worked with named Robert Jenkins, who is 68 years old and lives in Columbus, Ohio. Robert was a retired school administrator, a very disciplined man who took pride in his calm, quiet mornings. He would wake up, have his coffee in his armchair while reading the news, and stay indoors until the afternoon when it was warmer. He couldn't understand why his blood sugar was fluctuating so much and why he was developing a significant amount of abdominal fat despite his careful diet. What Robert didn't realize was that by staying in the dim light of his living room and remaining sedentary during those first 2 hours of the day, he was missing the critical window to jumpstart his metabolic engines. The body is designed to look for specific cues in the morning, bright blue light from the sun, and a bit of physical movement to signal the mitochondria that the day has begun and it is time to start burning fuel. Because Robert stayed still and in the dark, his body stayed in night mode. His mitochondria remained dormant and his insulin remained high, waiting for a signal that never arrived. I told him, Robert, your body doesn't listen to your good intentions, it listens to your actions. By sitting still, you are telling your cells that you are still asleep, so they keep the doors to your fat stores locked tight.
It is fascinating to think that something as simple as sitting in an armchair in Columbus, Ohio, could be the reason why a man's blood sugar won't stabilize. It really highlights how disconnected we have become from our natural biological needs. If Robert's mistake was staying in night mode, how common is this among the people you treat? It seems like a very easy trap to fall into, especially when you are retired and feel you have earned the right to a slow morning. How do we bridge that gap between the comfort we crave and the biological activity our bodies actually require to stay healthy?
It is perhaps the most common mistake I see, Jane, because our modern environment is designed for comfort, not for biological optimization. We have climate control and artificial lighting that keep us in a kind of permanent twilight. For someone like Robert, that comfort was actually a slow-acting poison for his metabolism. I had to convince him that the first hour of his day was the most important hour for his health. We started a simple protocol where he had to step out onto his porch for just 15 minutes of natural light and do some very light stretching, nothing strenuous, just enough to tell his muscles and his cells that the day had started. The transformation in his blood sugar levels within just 3 weeks was nothing short of miraculous. His body finally got the message. This is what I mean when I say the body hears behavior, not promises. You can promise your body you'll be healthy all you want, but if you don't give it the light and the movement it expects at dawn, it will remain in that protective fat-storing hibernation. We have to stop thinking of exercise as a chore and start thinking of it as a signal, a way of communicating with the deep intelligence of our cells to tell them it is time to wake up and work.
There is something so poetic about the idea that modern science, with all its high-tech labs and complex data, is finally circling back to the ancient wisdom that centenarians have known for generations. I'm thinking specifically of those amazing people in Japan, the ones who lived to be 100 with such grace and vitality. We often look at them and think it must be some exotic diet or rare herb, but your research suggests it might be something much more fundamental, a deep rhythmic connection to the natural world. How do these studies of the world's longest-lived people intersect with what you are seeing in the clinic? And does it mean that we can find health without the grueling diets we have been conditioned to believe are necessary?
It is one of the most beautiful realizations in my career, Jane. We spent decades looking for the magic nutrient in the Japanese diet, but what we found instead was a magic rhythm. In the blue zones, particularly in Okinawa, people don't count calories. They live in total alignment with their circadian clocks. They eat with the sun, they move with the sun, and they rest with the sun. This isn't just folklore anymore. It is biology. When we look at the cellular level, these centenarians have mitochondria that remain remarkably efficient because they are never confused. Their bodies always know exactly what time it is and what they should be doing with their energy. I saw this reflected in a patient named Maria Hernandez. Though not from Japan, she lived her life by these old world principles in San Antonio, Texas. She was 85 and had the metabolic profile of someone 20 years younger. She told me, "Doctor, I don't follow a diet, I follow the day." She ate her largest meal when the sun was highest and stopped eating as soon as the light began to fade. This simple alignment allowed her mitochondria to operate in a state of flow rather than a state of friction. Science is now confirming that this rhythm is actually more important than the specific calories we consume.
That phrase, "I don't follow a diet, I follow the day," is so incredibly profound. It suggests a level of peace and harmony that is the exact opposite of the stressful, calculated way we usually approach weight loss. If the secret to longevity and a healthy metabolism is this sense of flow, then it seems we have been making things far too difficult for ourselves with our obsession with apps and tracking every bite. Can we truly trust our bodies to manage themselves if we just provide the right rhythmic framework? Or is there still a need for that old-fashioned discipline we are all so afraid of?
The discipline we need is the discipline of rhythm, Jane, not the discipline of deprivation. When you provide that rhythmic framework, your body's internal intelligence takes over. Think of it like a symphony. The conductor doesn't have to play every instrument, he just has to provide the tempo. When the tempo is right, the music is beautiful. When we align our eating and moving with the natural cycles of light and dark, we are providing that tempo for our cells. In my work with centenarians and patients like Maria, I've seen that when the body feels it is in sync with nature, it naturally sheds excess weight because it no longer feels the need to protect itself against an unpredictable environment. The stress of dieting actually creates more cortisol, which tells the body to store fat. By following the day, you lower that stress and open the gates for energy to be used freely. It is a much more compassionate way to live, and as it turns out, it is also the most scientifically sound way to stay vibrant into your 90s and beyond. We are finally learning that we don't have to fight our biology, we just have to honor it.
It is often the things we don't notice that end up having the biggest impact on our health, isn't it? We might think we are doing fine because we are getting 8 hours of sleep, but if that sleep isn't doing its biological job, we are essentially running on empty. I'm struck by the idea that we can be asleep but not actually resting, and how that invisible failure can lead to the very weight gain and sluggishness we are trying to avoid. I wonder if you could help us understand those subtle, early warning signs that our internal clock is drifting, especially the ones that happen while we are tucked away in bed at night, thinking we are doing our bodies a favor.
This is a critical area of concern, Jane, because the quality of our rest is the foundation of our metabolic health. I remember a patient named Linda Morales, an 82-year-old woman living in San Antonio, Texas. Linda was very proud of her sleep schedule. She was in bed by 10 p.m. and didn't get up until 6 a.m. every day. Yet she felt incredibly heavy and sluggish, and her weight was steadily increasing. When we looked deeper, we realized that while Linda was technically asleep, her body was not entering the deep restorative phases where fat burning actually occurs. Because she kept her house very warm and used a bright tablet before bed, her cortisol levels remained elevated throughout the night. Her brain thought it was still daytime, even though her eyes were closed. As a result, her body stayed in a sugar-burning mode instead of switching to the fat-burning mode that should happen during deep sleep. I told her, Linda, you are sleeping, but your cells are still at work in the office. This is a major warning sign. If you wake up feeling heavy, stiff, or like you haven't really rested despite the hours in bed, your metabolic clock is likely misaligned.
That is a chilling thought, that we can be in bed for 8 hours and our cells are still effectively sitting at their desks, stressed and holding on to fat. It makes me realize how many of us might be living in this state of fake rest. If the signals we send before bed are that powerful, it seems we have a lot more responsibility for our nighttime biology than we realized. For someone like Linda in San Antonio, how do we begin to reverse that internal light show and convince the body that it is truly safe to enter that deep, fat-burning repair mode?
We have to be very intentional about the transition into darkness, Jane. For Linda, we had to eliminate that blue light from her tablet at least 2 hours before sleep, and perhaps most importantly, we had to lower the temperature in her bedroom. The body needs a drop in core temperature to signal the brain that it is time for deep metabolic repair. When we sleep in a warm room, we stay in a shallow state of rest. By making these small changes, Linda started to experience what we call metabolic flexibility, the ability of the body to switch between burning sugar and burning fat. She began to wake up feeling light and energized for the first time in years. This is the warning sign everyone should look for. How do you feel in those first 10 minutes after waking? If the answer is heavy and tired, it is time to look at your nighttime signals. Your body isn't failing you, it is just waiting for the right environmental cues to go into its deep cleaning mode. We have to treat our sleep not just as a break from life, but as a vital metabolic process that requires the right conditions to succeed.
It is so easy to get lost in the sea of health advice, especially when it comes to what we put in our bodies for breakfast. We are bombarded with images of healthy oatmeal or fruit bowls, and we think we are doing the right thing for our aging hearts and kidneys. But you are suggesting that some of these very foods, even the ones labeled as healthy, might be triggering a hormonal response that effectively shuts down our ability to burn fat for the rest of the day. It is a bit frightening to think that our best intentions at 7 o'clock a.m. could be setting us up for metabolic failure by noon. How do we navigate this minefield of healthy foods that might actually be hurting us as we cross into our 60s and 70s?
It is a delicate balance, Jane, and one that requires us to look past the labels and into the biology of insulin and cortisol. Many traditional healthy breakfasts are actually very high in hidden sugars or simple carbohydrates that cause a sharp spike in insulin. For a younger person, the body can handle that spike and recover quickly. But after 60, our insulin response is often slower and more prolonged. If you start your day with a big bowl of sweetened oatmeal or a large glass of orange juice, you are essentially flooding your system with insulin right when your body should be transitioning out of its nighttime fat-burning state. High insulin is like a master lock on your fat cells. As long as it is present, your body cannot and will not burn stored fat. You might feel a burst of energy for an hour, but then you'll crash and your body will scream for more sugar, creating a vicious cycle that lasts all day. I've seen so many patients who were frustrated because they were eating what they thought was a perfect diet, yet their midsections continued to grow. We have to realize that what was healthy at 30 might be metabolic sabotage at 70.
This idea of the insulin lock is such a powerful way to understand why we get stuck. It feels like we are accidentally locking the door and then wondering why we can't get inside. If these morning staples are the culprits, it must be a shock to people who have been eating the same breakfast for decades. How do we shift our thinking from just eating health foods to eating for hormonal balance? Is it as simple as changing the order of what we eat? Or do we need to completely rethink the traditional morning meal to keep those fat-burning gates open?
It is about choosing foods that provide steady energy without the insulin spike, Jane. We want to look for proteins and healthy fats that signal satiety and stability to the brain. Instead of that bowl of cereal, think about eggs or a bit of avocado. These foods tell the body that there is plenty of fuel available, so there is no need to panic and store fat. When you keep your insulin levels low in the morning, you allow your body to continue tapping into its own fat stores for energy. It is a much more efficient way to run the human engine. I often tell my patients to think of their morning meal as a foundation for the day's hormones. If you build that foundation on a sugar spike, the whole house will be unstable. But if you build it on steady proteins and fats, you'll find that your energy remains consistent, your brain stays sharp, and your body feels much more willing to let go of that stubborn weight. We have to stop being afraid of fats and start being wary of anything that comes in a box with a healthy label but is actually just refined carbohydrates in disguise.
There is something incredibly hopeful about the idea that we don't need radical life changes to see radical results. We often think that health requires hours at the gym or a complete overhaul of our existence, but you are pointing toward these small, almost invisible habits that can have a massive ripple effect on our metabolism. I'm particularly intrigued by this concept of brown fat and how something as simple as a slight change in temperature can wake up our internal furnace. It sounds like science fiction, yet the results you are seeing, especially with your older patients, seem to suggest that we have this hidden power within us just waiting to be activated. Can you tell us about someone who utilized these small shifts to reclaim their vitality?
It truly is like finding a hidden treasure within our own biology, Jane. We used to think that only babies had brown fat, but we now know that adults, especially older adults, still have these incredible cells that actually burn energy to produce heat. One of the most inspiring stories I have is of a gentleman named George Williams, who is 90 years old and lives in Portland, Oregon. George was quite frail and had lost a lot of muscle, yet he had a surprising amount of internal fat that was making him feel very heavy and tired. He lived in a very warm, cozy home, and he never liked to be cold. I introduced him to the idea of mild cold exposure, nothing dramatic, just turning the thermostat down to 66 degrees for a few hours before bed and taking a quick walk in the cool Portland air. This small drop in temperature was enough to signal his brown fat to wake up. Unlike white fat, which just sits there, brown fat is packed with mitochondria. When it is activated by the cold, it starts burning through white fat stores to keep the body warm. The Harvard research shows that this can increase our metabolic rate by over 40%. For George, it was like someone finally turned the heater on from the inside.
To think that a 90-year-old man in Portland could increase his metabolic rate by 40% just by turning down the thermostat is absolutely staggering. It makes me wonder how much we are overcomplicating our approach to health. If the key is just to give our bodies these natural challenges, why have we moved so far away from them? We have become so addicted to our 72-degree living rooms that we have essentially put our most powerful weight loss tool into a deep freeze. How do we encourage people to embrace these small discomforts, especially when they feel more vulnerable to the cold as they age?
We have to reframe it not as discomfort, but as activation, Jane. George didn't have to suffer. He just had to experience a different rhythm of temperature. When we live in a constant, unchanging climate, our bodies get lazy. Our brown fat goes dormant because it isn't needed. But when we introduce those gentle shifts, we are giving our cells a reason to stay young and active. George started to notice that he wasn't just losing that internal fat, he was feeling more alert and his sleep was much deeper. This is the beauty of these small habits. They work with your biology instead of against it. You don't need a gym membership to activate your brown fat. You just need to step outside for a few minutes on a crisp morning or keep your bedroom a little cooler at night. These are the whispers that our cells understand. For George, it gave him a sense of control over his health that he hadn't felt in decades. He realized that even at 90, his body was still capable of responding to the world in a powerful way. It is about reclaiming that ancient connection between our environment and our internal fire.
We have covered so much ground today, from the microscopic world of mitochondria to the vast cycles of the sun and the seasons. It seems that the ultimate lesson here is one of listening, really listening to the silent language that our bodies are speaking every day. As we look at this three-phase rhythm you mentioned, activation, maintenance, and recovery, it feels like a roadmap for a new kind of aging, one that is defined by wisdom and harmony rather than struggle. If you had to distill all of these insights into a core philosophy for our listeners who are sitting at home, perhaps feeling a bit overwhelmed by it all, what is the most important thing for them to hold on to as they move forward?
If there is one thing I want everyone to take away, Jane, it is that your body is always on your side. It is never trying to make you gain weight or feel tired out of spite. It is simply reacting to the signals it receives. The three-phase rhythm is our way of giving the body the right signals at the right time. Phase 1 is activation, waking up the system with light and gentle movement in the morning. Phase 2 is maintenance, nourishing the body with stable, non-spiking foods during the day to keep the metabolic gates open. And Phase 3 is recovery, allowing the body to cool down and enter deep, fat-burning rest at night. When you follow this rhythm, you stop being a victim of your biology and start being its partner. It isn't about fighting your body to stay thin. It is about listening to it to stay vibrant. I've seen this shift change lives more than any prescription I've ever written. When a person over 60 realizes they don't have to be at war with their own hunger or their own exhaustion, a massive weight is lifted, not just physically, but emotionally.
That idea of being a partner to your body instead of a victim is so incredibly healing. It replaces that sense of betrayal we talked about earlier with a sense of agency and hope. It feels like we are being given the keys to a house we thought we were locked out of. As people begin to implement these phases, I imagine they will find that the physical changes are just the beginning, that there is a mental and spiritual awakening that comes when you are finally in sync with yourself. How do you see your patients change as they move from that state of friction into this state of flow? And what does it tell us about the true potential of the later years of life?
They become more present, Jane. When you aren't constantly worried about your weight or your energy levels, you have the freedom to focus on what really matters: your family, your passions, your legacy. The true potential of our later years is not just to survive, but to flourish with a level of clarity and peace that we didn't have when we were younger. By honoring our biological rhythms, we are clearing away the static that prevents us from enjoying this stage of life. I've seen people in their 80s start new hobbies, travel, and engage with their communities with a vigor that surprises everyone around them. It all starts with that simple decision to stop fighting and start listening. We aren't just managing a decline, we are optimizing a masterpiece. Your 60s, 70s, and 80s can be the most vibrant years of your life if you just give your cells the rhythm they are waiting for. It is a journey of homecoming, a return to the natural state of health that is your birthright.
As we come to the end of this incredible conversation, I am left with such a deep sense of gratitude for the wisdom you've shared. It is so much more than medical advice. It is a message of profound respect for the human journey. You've shown us that even when the world tells us we are slowing down, our bodies are still capable of incredible renewal if we only know how to ask. It is about losing the fear and gaining a new kind of freedom. Before we say goodbye, I wonder if you have any final thoughts for that person listening right now who might still be feeling that quiet hesitation, that fear that it's too late for them to change their story.
Jane, I want to say directly to that person, it is never, ever too late. Your biology is remarkably resilient and it is waiting for you to lead the way. I've seen people at 95 make changes that improve their quality of life in weeks. The weight you might be carrying is not a mark of failure. It is just a signal that hasn't been answered yet. When my patients start this journey, they don't just lose pounds, they lose the fear that they are broken. They realize they are still strong, still capable, and still very much alive. It has been such an honor to share these stories and this science with you today. Thank you for creating this space where we can talk about these things with the heart and the depth they deserve. I hope everyone listening feels a little lighter today, not just in body, but in spirit. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Dr. Gupta, for your compassion and your tireless dedication to our health. You've given us so much to think about and, more importantly, so much to hope for. To all our listeners, thank you for joining us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope this conversation has touched you and given you the tools to begin your own journey toward vitality. Remember, your body is a masterpiece and it is ready to listen to you. If you found today's episode helpful, please do subscribe to our channel and share this podcast with your friends and loved ones. We have so many more deep dives into health and aging planned for you, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Until next time, take a deep breath, step into the light, and take good care of yourselves. This is Jane Pauley, wishing you a rhythmic and vibrant day ahead. Goodbye for now.